We're back now with our original sales data, and we're going to see how to create a pivot table. I'll click inside the pivot table here, and to create a pivot table I'll click the Insert tab on the ribbon. I can select either Pivot Table to create one from scratch or Recommended Pivot Tables to choose one that Excel recommends for me. But before I can do any of this, I need to ask myself what questions I have of this data, because the question will determine the pivot table that I create. Let's consider that we want to know what the hardware sales and support fees were for each quarter of the year. Now that I know what I want to look at, I can click inside the table and choose Recommended Pivot Tables to see if one of the recommended pivot tables that Excel provides me with can answer that question for me. The first pivot table is sum of hardware sales by location. Well, I want hardware sales, but I want it by quarter. Then I have support fees by location. And here I have support fees, hardware sales, and accounts by quarter. That's a little bit more information than I need, but it's pretty close. And I know that if I keep looking through here, I'm not going to find anything any better. So I'm going to select this one because it's the closest to what I want, and I can easily get rid of accounts later on. So I'll click it and click OK. And Excel has gone ahead and created my pivot table for me. It's got in it pretty much all I need, but I don't want accounts, so I'm going to come over here to the field list and deselect accounts to remove it from the table. This pivot table is now showing me the sum of fees and the sum of hardware sales for each of the 4 quarters. And if I want to total these values, I can drag across them and then read the sum from the status bar. In the pivot table list here, we can add or remove fields from the pivot table to answer different questions. We can also rearrange the data that we have here in different ways to see if it's easier for us to understand the data that way. I'm going to drag, for example, values into the rows. And you can see now that we would see the quarter 1 and then the support fees and hardware sales for quarter 1, and then the same for quarter 2, quarter 3 and quarter 4. We can also rearrange these 2 items. So for example, we could see support fees and then the 4 quarters, and hardware and the 4 quarters. We have the alternative of looking at our data in a lot of different ways by simply rearranging it in the field list. But again, the questions that we have about our data and the answers that we want to get from it will largely determine exactly how the pivot table should be laid out.